Now, with this basically 6-day operation, the Spanish are either annihilated or surrender. They will, in fact, just give up the Philippines. And now it's time for us to go to phase 2 of the war. It's time for the fleet to leave the Philippines, go back across the Pacific, and take care of Spain, where this war probably or potentially could have started. Where do you think we're off to next? Off to Cuba. Now, this brand new fleet steaming across the Pacific does take some time. It takes a couple of weeks to get all the way across the Pacific. When we are going to arrive in the Caribbean, when we get to Cuba, the war has been going on technically for a few weeks. The Spanish have heard that they've been annihilated in the Philippines. They need to be certain that they're more careful when it comes to Cuba. In the Caribbean, they're going to take some extra measures. They do what's probably very, very wise. Not even probably. They do what they should have done. They know that Cuba is the next target. It's going to take place. So they put their fleet in a very strategic spot. They're going to move it to the south of Cuba. They move their fleet into Santiago Harbor. Now, like I said, probably a good idea. Santiago Harbor is a nice, safe harbor. It's defendable. And in fact, just to the north of it, there are some fairly significant hills right in here. These hills are the high ground. The Spanish army occupies the high ground and sets up basically 24 cannons around Santiago Harbor. Now, we've talked before about the advantages of having the high ground. What's one good thing about having the high ground? Why is it always a positive? What do you get out of it? Get what's one thing?
The enemy has to run up the hill.
Yep, you always have gravity working your side. They have to come up the hill to remove you from that spot. Something else, just here. You have the vantage point. You can see much farther than they can. Good. What else is there then? Good. What about the range of your cannons if you have the high ground? Can you fire them farther?
Yeah.
Basically, yes. Having the high ground right here is a great idea because you have 24 cannons protecting your fleets. If we send this American fleet into Santiago Harbor like we did in Manila, we are going to get annihilated. We need to take the hills first. Now, who wants to volunteer to go run up these hills into 24 cannons? Jed, you want to? Sure? I think that's a wise choice to say no. We need someone who's a little bit crazy. Someone who is looking for some adventure. Someone that you guys have already heard of before. Someone who's going to become president, but is not in 1898. Who am I referring to? Teddy Roosevelt. Like I say, Teddy's a little bit of a lunatic. In 1898, Teddy Roosevelt is basically the second highest ranking officer in the Navy. He is the assistant secretary to the Navy, and when war comes, he says, I want to go fight. Let's go. The secretary of the Navy is basically the highest ranking officer, and he says, what are you talking about? You don't go fight anymore. You're an officer. You're a paper pusher. You have a desk job. Stay here. Teddy Roosevelt tells his superior, look, there's a war. I am going to go fight in it. Leave it to Teddy Roosevelt. And his superior says, no, you stay here. So Teddy Roosevelt quits and joins the army as a low-ranking private, as low as it gets. He says, I want to go to war. Here's the army saying, I know you. You're the assistant secretary to the Navy. What are you doing here? He goes, I want to go fight in the war. Stop. You're a lunatic. So Teddy Roosevelt makes his own army. I kid you not. He goes and finds, really, the dregs of society. He finds people that have been convicted murderers, rapists, pirates, and says, "Follow me. We're going to Cuba." He takes his own group from Miami to Cuba, and he brings his own supplies. Basically, he has about 40 horses on this transport ship. When they hit some rough weather, about half of the horses fall into the ocean. Not a problem for Teddy Roosevelt. We go anyway. They arrive basically just outside, on the other side of the island of Santiago Harbor. They arrive in Cuba, they look up at the hills, there are 24 cannon, and Teddy Roosevelt says, "Follow me!" Is that, I don't want to do that. That's a bad idea. Teddy Roosevelt goes anyway. He charges up San Juan Hill, this range that's going to be protecting Santiago Harbor. He needs to take out basically 24 cannons. Here's the rest of the army landing in Cuba, watching this lunatic and his murderers, rapists, and pirates running up the hills into 24 cannons. Does anyone else see a problem with this? No? Okay, well, you're wrong, okay? Teddy Roosevelt charges up the hill with his group that he calls the Rough Riders, knocking out all 24 cannons. He's a lunatic, but he's good at what he does. He's crazy like a fox. He knocks out the 24 cannons, waves the American flag on top, and here's the rest of the army saying, "Oh my gosh, he did it." And he's alive. He instantly becomes famous as a lunatic, but a successful lunatic. The cannons are now knocked out. So now what do? Now you send the Navy. The Navy shows up and they find the Spanish fleet there, these wooden ships powered by sail. They give them an option. You can either have the same fate as what took place in the Philippines, we can annihilate you, or you can surrender. What do you think the Spanish probably should do? Should probably surrender. Probably. But they're an old European power. Here are these upstart Americans saying you should surrender. So what are the Spanish going to do? They prepare for war. They raise the sails and wait. They try to run for it. They try just to paddle their way out of the harbor. What do you think's going to happen next? Annihilate them. Turn them into matchsticks. They try to run, and it's not going to go well. They're annihilated as well. Cuba now becomes the next portion of the American Empire. Now that Cuba has been liberated from the Spanish, why not take another old Spanish colony? Once Cuba's secured, we simply move on and take Puerto Rico next. Puerto Rico was a long-standing Spanish colony for years and years. Today, Puerto Rico is still an American territory. Puerto Rico is part of America, all because of what takes place in 1898.